The dig team had opened 900 alien time capsules across the galaxy. Every single one held art or music or bones. This one, buried on Earth 400 years ago, long before humans knew aliens existed, held a single sheet of paper. And at the top of that paper was a name. Their name, the species reading it. Written by a human who had been dead for 4 centuries. It said, "We knew you would come, and we prepared." That letter wasn't a historical curiosity. It was a map. A detailed dossier of 17 coalition species. Their biology, their governments, their deepest vulnerabilities, buried 4 centuries before humans should have even known aliens existed. The team tried to classify the discovery. But the truth is already spreading across the galaxy, and it raises one terrifying question. If they predicted who would find the capsule, what else did they predict? The survey vessel Calith's Vigil was the first to breach the capsule's containment field. Captain Drellhan, a Calith himself, amphibious, three-hearted species number 4 on the list, personally pulled the paper from its vacuum-sealed tube. The moment his translator rendered the first line, he sealed the dig site. Too late. His own science officer had already sent a burst transmission to the Coalition's Central Archive. Within 48 minutes, the Council of 17 convened an emergency session. The letter was 16 pages long, handwritten, in flawless High Calith, a language humans hadn't even decoded yet, let alone spoken. Page 1 addressed the Caliph by their own internal name, the name they use only in sealed religious rites. Page 2 described the exact genetic bottleneck the Vexari would suffer in 3 generations. Page 3 gave the precise coordinates of a dormant silicate hive that the Coalition had only discovered 2 years earlier and had never shared with any human government. It went on. 17 species. 17 dossiers of bone-deep secrets, and at the bottom of every page the same signature, "We who wait." Earth's ambassador, Miriam Chen, was summoned to the chamber and shown the document. Her reaction was caught on 17 body language analyzers. Genuine shock. Pupil dilation, microtremors, cortisol spike. She had no idea who wrote it. Neither did the Coalition's best forensic AI. The ink was carbon-based, 412 years old, and the paper contained plant fibers native to a region of Earth that was deforested before humanity invented electricity. Every physical test confirmed the artifact was authentic. The message was real. Somehow, a human from the time of wooden ships and plague doctors had known the future. The council fractured along old fault lines. The warlike VAR delegation saw it as a threat, proof that humans were masking their true capabilities. The diplomatic Jith Combine argued for careful study. Ambassador Chen insisted on a joint investigation. But the real chaos began when the predictions started coming true. On day 3 of the crisis, a Vexari cargo hauler exploded in the exact orbital lane, and with the exact casualty count the letter had listed, killed 107 souls, including the nephew of the Vexari delegate. The letter had called it a test. It said, "When this ship burns, you will know the next warning is real." And the next warning was far worse. Page 5 of the letter was a schedule, not a prediction, a countdown. 23 events, spaced across the next 31 days, each one listed with exact times, locations, and casualty figures. The Vexari freighter explosion had been number 1. Number 2 was already ticking. The primary thermal regulator on orbital array Theta 7 would fail at 3:42 a.m. station time, triggering a cascading power overload that would destroy one of the most critical relay hubs in the quadrant. 17,000 colonists depended on that array for atmosphere processing. The Coalition had 3 hours to stop it. The Council's chief engineer, a Jith named Merle, rushed a full diagnostic of the array's hardware. The regulator was a sealed unit, built with a predicted failure curve of 900,000 operational hours. It had been installed less than a decade ago. There was no rational reason it should fail. And yet, according to the letter, it would not from normal wear, but from a microfracture in a single cadmium alloy flange that had been manufactured 300 years before the part was ever designed. The flaw was invisible to every scanner the coalition owned. It shouldn't have existed, but the letter described the exact serial number of the faulty batch, the name of the technician who'd missed it, and the precise temperature fluctuation that would trigger the shatter. Captain Drellhan ordered an emergency shutdown. It saved the array, but not without cost. The failsafe tripped 70 seconds early, venting plasma across 6 docking bays and injuring 83 crew members. That, too, was in the letter. And the letter had said, "You will save the station, but you will not save everyone." A pattern was forming. The warnings weren't just predictions. They were a test. The humans had known, 4 centuries ago, exactly how the coalition would respond to each crisis, and they had written the outcomes as foregone fact. Ambassador Chen refused to accept it as intimidation. She argued the letter was a gift, a roadmap designed to help them. But the Vexari delegate, whose nephew had just burned in the void, saw it differently. She accused humanity of planting these disasters, of orchestrating a slow-motion atrocity to prove a point. The VAR delegate, General Axion, watched the chamber from his seat, scales flushed with the deep amber of suspicion. He had spent a lifetime resenting the weak pacifist races of the Republic, and here at last was a species that had tricked them all. He did not speak yet. He waited, because the letter had a page addressed to him, too, and it said he would hold the decisive vote. Chen's team, working with a small group of human xenohistorians, traced the paper's origin to a region of Earth's northern continent that, in the early 17th century, had been home to a monastic order with no known interest in astronomy. That order, the keepers of the unfinished cipher, had vanished from all records by the year 1643. Their monastery was destroyed in a fire. Nothing was thought to survive. But when a coalition ground-penetrating scan was authorized, it revealed a subterranean vault buried 300 feet beneath the ruin, a vault that had been sealed with a geometric lock using equations humanity didn't develop until the 21st century. Inside, they found a library. Not books. Data crystals, encoded in a format that predated human digital storage by 200 years. And a second letter, this one addressed not to the coalition, but to humanity itself. It was from the keepers. They said, "We did not predict the future. We inherited a message from those who came before us, and they inherited it from those who came before them. A chain of transmission stretching back thousands of years. A warning passed hand to hand across the darkness of time, waiting for the day the stars would answer back." That revelation changed everything. Humanity wasn't the author of the predictions. Humanity was the courier. A single, fragile species that had been chosen or cursed to carry an intelligence not their own. The real source, the origin of the letter's knowledge, remained unknown. But the keeper's final entry was clear. The warnings would escalate until the coalition faced a choice. Either unify under the guidance of the message or face extinction. The next event on the schedule was not a mechanical failure. It was a biological outbreak on a silicate world that had no known pathogens. And it would begin in 6 hours. General Axion stood and addressed the council. His voice was stone. "We have let our fear make us weak," he said, "but this is no longer a matter of debate. The VAR will follow the warnings, and we will enforce compliance if necessary." He looked directly at Ambassador Chen. For the first time, a human looked at a VAR and saw not an ally, but an executioner. And the letter had already named the first species that would be sacrificed to the new order. It was page 9, the Vexari homeworld. The Vexari homeworld, Ventar, held 12 billion souls. Page 9 described its death in clinical detail. Not a war, not a weapon. a biological collapse triggered by a dormant retrovirus baked into the planet's food supply 7,000 years ago by a species that had since gone extinct. The virus had no cure, no vaccine, and an incubation period of exactly 41 days. Once symptoms appeared, the infected would lose higher cognitive function within hours, reverting to a feral state. Within 72 hours, the body would shut down. The letter estimated a 99.8% fatality rate, and the first case, according to the countdown, would present in 19 days. The Vexari delegate, Vera, shattered her translator implant against the chamber wall. She accused the humans of engineering the pathogen. Chen denied it, but the room was already breaking. The Jith Combine demanded immediate quarantine of all food exports from Ventar, an act that would starve 7 dependent colony worlds. General Axion overrode them. He declared the Vexari system under VAR martial authority. His fleet, already positioned 2 jumps away, began a blockade. He cited the letter as his mandate. "We are not here to debate," he said. "We are here to survive." Then the silicate outbreak began, right on schedule. A silicate hive on the outer moon of Threx9 reported a creeping fungal bloom that dissolved crystalline nervous tissue. The letter had named it spore strain gamma, a biological weapon left over from a war fought before the coalition existed. It spread through electromagnetic resonance, jumping between silicate nodes across light seconds of vacuum. Within 16 hours, 3 more hives went dark. The letter had said it would stop after 12. It did. The coalition lost 4,000 silicates. The mood in the council shifted. The warnings were no longer distant fears. They were a noose tightening. Chen, working with Merle, cross-referenced the Keeper's second letter against the original document. A stunning pattern emerged. The Keepers hadn't just received the message. They had been prepared to carry it. Human genetic records showed a subtle marker, a non-coding DNA sequence, that was shared by a tiny percentage of every species in the coalition. It appeared in exactly 0.03% of the population, across 17 species, as if seeded deliberately across evolutionary trees. The Keepers called it the key, and the letter's final pages claimed that only those carrying the key could fully understand the warnings. They were the intended readers. Everyone else was collateral. Axion tested positive for the marker. So did Vera. So did Chen. So did Captain Drellhan. They were all among the chosen 0.03%. The letter had selected its audience across centuries. It had known who would be born, who would rise to power, who would stand in this chamber at this moment. The scale of the foresight was paralyzing, but the Keeper's letter had a warning of its own. The key is not a gift. It is a responsibility. Those who carry it must make the choice the others cannot. And if they choose wrong, the chain of transmission ends. Forever. The next event on the schedule was not a disaster. It was a convergence. All 17 species carrying the key would experience a simultaneous synaptic event, a shared vision, the Keepers called it, triggered by a specific alignment of quantum resonance pulses that would reach the galactic core in 49 hours. The vision would show them the true enemy, the one the warnings were preparing them to fight. The letter said, "You will see them all, and then you will understand why we needed you to trust us." But Axion had already made his choice. He didn't believe in shared visions. He believed in control. He ordered the VAR fleet to advance on Ventar, not to protect it, but to sterilize it. If the Vexari homeworld was the catalyst for a wider collapse, he would remove the catalyst. 12 billion lives. He told the council he was saving 1 trillion. Vera drew a weapon on the chamber floor. The security grid neutralized her before she could fire. As she was dragged away, she locked eyes with Axion and spoke the words the letter had predicted she would speak. "You are already dead." He didn't flinch, but Chen saw his hand tremble for the first time. And in the depths of the vault on Earth, a data crystal that had been silent for 4 centuries began to emit a low, steady pulse, syncing to the countdown clock that only the key carriers could hear. Axion's fleet emerged over Ventar with full weapon batteries charged. 12 billion lives hung beneath him. He had given the order, convinced he was saving a trillion. But as his command ship locked onto the planetary defense grid, the countdown reached zero. The quantum resonance pulse swept the galaxy, and every key carrier in existence stopped breathing at the same instant. Chen felt it first as a pressure behind her eyes, then a flood of light. She was no longer in the council chamber. She was standing on a barren world under a black sky, staring at a tear in the fabric of space so vast it swallowed the horizon. The maw. Not a living thing, not a dead thing, a hunger given form. It wasn't coming. It was already here. Across 17 billion years, across 17,000 consumed galaxies, it had been moving. And this galaxy was next. The vision showed her the timeline. The maw would breach the outer rim in 112 years. Every species in the coalition, every weapon they possessed, every alliance they had built, it would all mean nothing, unless they were ready. And ready meant one thing: they had to become what the warnings had been shaping them to be. Not an alliance of separate species, but a single, fused consciousness. A living weapon built from the genetic codes of 17 races, threaded together by the key. The choice the letter spoke of was not about who to save. It was about whether they would surrender their individual identities to become something greater. If they did, the maw could be stopped. If they didn't, the galaxy would fall. Axion saw the same vision from his flagship bridge. He saw the maw consume Ventar, then Var Prime, then Earth. He saw his own claws turn to ash. And he understood in that moment that the sterilization order was not strength. It was the first step toward the future he had just witnessed. The letter had predicted his choice not because it was inevitable, but because it was the test. Would a species bred for war choose annihilation, or would it choose to die to itself so that something new could live? Axion canceled the strike with one word. Then he opened a channel to the council. His voice was raw. "I was wrong," he said, "but the letter already knew I would say that." The keeper's vault pulsed brighter. The data crystal had been waiting for this moment. It projected a holographic message into the chamber on Earth and simultaneously into the council hall. The figure that appeared was human. An old woman, hair white as bone, eyes sharp with centuries of sorrow. She wore a simple robe, the mark of the keeper stitched at her collar, but her face was unmistakably Miriam Chen. Older, scarred, grieving, but the same woman who now stood frozen in the council chamber. The future Chen spoke. "To those of you watching this, I am the last of the original weavers. I buried the capsule 400 years ago in your timeline. In mine, I buried it 8,000 years from now on the day the maw broke through. We survived, barely. But we learned that time is not a line, it is a loop that can be tied. We tied it. The warning you found is not a prediction. It is a memory, my memory. I lived through every event on that page. I watched every death. And then I came back to make sure this time we choose differently." She paused, and her eyes found Axion's in the chamber as if she could see him across time. "General, you made the right choice. Now finish it." The hologram faded. The council chamber was silent. Chen, the young ambassador, looked at the hands that would one day write the letter that had already saved them. She understood now. She was not the courier. She was the author. And she had just watched her future self die to give the galaxy a second chance. The letter had been addressed to the species that dug it up because they were the ones who would build the weapon. The humans hadn't known the future. They had lived it. And then they had gone back to make sure everyone else would, too. Axion knelt, a Var general kneeling before a human ambassador, not in surrender, in covenant. The first thread of the weapon was woven in that gesture. By nightfall, 17 species had begun the process of integration. Not conquest, not alliance, fusion. The maw was coming, but this time it would find something it had never encountered before, a galaxy that had already learned how to die and chose to be reborn. The full cycle of the time loop remains classified by the Unified Council, but fragments have leaked. The old woman in the hologram, the future Chen, left one final message. not for the delegates, but for herself. The young ambassador found it in the vault weeks later, buried beneath a cipher only she could break. It said, "You will doubt everything. You will wonder if it was worth the cost. You will ask yourself whether you are a messenger or a puppet. Stop asking. The maw doesn't care. The only thing that matters is whether, at the end of everything, you can look at the sky and know you did not look away." She never saw the maw herself. The loop ensured she would not need to. Her sacrifice was not in dying, but in living with the memory of a future that would never happen, carrying the grief of 1 trillion lives that were unwritten so that new ones could begin. That is the burden of the key. Not power, not destiny, memory, and the choice to carry it forward. If you found a letter addressed to you, written centuries ago, with your name and your mistakes and your secret hopes, would you open it? Or would you bury it again and walk away? Because somewhere, maybe not so far away, someone might be writing that letter right now. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and we'll keep digging.